Who is she to dare touch a SEAL's gun? A voice tore through the heavy air in the armory. In the corner of the room, she kept her head down, silently cleaning a gun that no one else could fix. No uniform, no rank, no explanations. Just hands stained with gun oil and a gaze that no one dared to meet for too long. But why would a seasoned Special Forces soldier trust her more than the military engineers? The answer doesn't lie in her file, but in a past she has never shared with anyone. Before diving into a story that will keep you glued to the screen, I have a small request. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love inspiring stories, and don't forget to leave a comment letting me know. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you live? It always feels amazing to see the whole world come together, just to share a meaningful moment. No one called her by name. Not in the morning briefings, not in the performance reports, not even in the hallway conversations where people talked about everything except what truly mattered. Layla Brennan was only known as the woman at the far end of the armory, with a slender frame, dark hair neatly tied back, eyes always cast downward, and hands always stained with machine oil. Her name appeared at the bottom of the assignment roster, a simple line: Equipment Enhancement Technician, DARPA contract. No one really knew what DARPA had sent her here to do, nor did anyone care. In an environment where every detail was controlled, she was the detail everyone overlooked. Her work wasn't on the training schedule. She didn't participate in any routine assessments. No one verified her technical qualifications, and there was no military record to check. Even her timesheet didn't show up in the main system. To the soldiers here, she was just a part of the hazy backdrop of civilian support. A shadow in a machine no one had time to examine closely. Layla didn't protest the way people saw her. She didn't try to justify herself. She just arrived earlier than everyone else, chose a workbench near the emergency exit, and began working on the discarded weapons, the broken equipment repeatedly deemed faulty that no one wanted to touch. M4s with unresponsive triggers, warped CQBR components, mechanisms labeled unserviceable by the main technicians. She took them on as if it were routine. No expression, no complaints. She cleaned every part, measured every deviation, recalibrated every delay. People often saw her sitting for hours with a single firearm, as if listening to its story. More than once, someone passing by would smirk, a mix of pity and skepticism. Some whispered that she was a test case, brought in through internal connections, a civilian hiring experiment. Others speculated she'd been discharged from the military and reassigned to save face. No one ever asked for real, nor did anyone have the patience to glance more than once at her corner workbench. But some things didn't need asking to be known. Occasionally, people noticed guns that had repeatedly failed began working smoothly after leaving her bench. Persistent system errors suddenly vanished. An SR-15, once so sandlocked it was deemed unsalvageable, returned with a trigger pull so smooth it was almost unbelievable. People started talking about luck, then coincidence, then newbies always get lucky. But no one had an explanation when the number of successful repairs from her station began far exceeding the average. And the strange thing was, she still didn't say a word. No claiming credit, no denials, no request for a title change. She just kept working, as if everything needed to be fixed before anyone noticed it was ever broken. In a world where everyone fought to be right, Layla chose to quietly correct what was wrong. And then, one afternoon, no one could quite pinpoint, a specialized weapon was placed on her bench, by the last person the entire base would have expected to do so. An action not in the manuals, not permitted by the rules, but one that made every eye turn. Not because she spoke up, but because someone else stepped back. Because sometimes recognition doesn't start with an introduction, but with the moment someone steps aside to let you step forward.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. subscribe, and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
Layla didn't talk about herself. She didn't need to. Everything worth knowing was in the way she worked. Quietly, precisely, as if time didn't exist and mistakes weren't allowed. No one saw her study, yet she seemed to know everything already. On a Wednesday morning, M4 serial number 1147 was returned for the third time that month. The same issue, a misfeed in the chamber mechanism, causing the round to load improperly. A gun that had passed through 3 technicians, disassembled down to its last screw, and still wouldn't function reliably. This time, it was placed on her bench. No notice, no instructions, no expectations. She silently put on her gloves, pulled her tool tray closer, and began. No technical drawings, no need to look up error codes. Her hands moved over the components like a blind person reading Braille, gently, feeling with her skin, not her eyes. She paused at a point between the gas tube and the support shaft, a tiny angle that only someone who'd operated a weapon in harsh conditions would notice. From an old canvas pouch, she pulled out a small device, a fine-tuning lever with a cable, its tip curved like a half-cut fishhook. It wasn't standard issue. It wasn't in DARPA's inventory or any military repair kit, but it fit perfectly into the dead space of the gun's frame. A light press, a nearly inaudible click. Then she gently rotated the body, adjusting the pressure angle, and silently stared at the weapon, as if waiting for it to respond. She was doing something only a few had ever seen, the kind of fine-tuning maneuvers SEAL units used when a weapon couldn't be allowed to fail, not in sand, mud, or blood. That kind of technique wasn't in manuals. It was passed down by word of mouth, taught through experience, learned by paying the price of mistakes, and sometimes lives. No one knew where she learned it, and she wasn't about to tell. The armory's head technician had once passed by, glancing at her work. He said nothing, but in his eyes something shifted. No longer the casual glance at the woman fixing spare parts, but the look of someone who just realized there was another person in the room who knew more than they'd thought. Layla completed the final adjustment after 17 minutes. Not rushed, not slow. Every movement was perfectly timed, as if she were performing a ritual. Not for anyone to see, but not hidden either. She wiped away her fingerprints, reassembled each part in its precise place. Then she gently pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. No jam, no delay. The mechanical click rang out crisp and solid, as if the gun had never been faulty. No one asked what she'd done. No technical report was added. Only the M4, now functioning smoothly, was returned to the reserve stock with a brief note. Stabilized. But what was truly stabilized wasn't just the gun. It was trust. The kind that began to quietly build from moments like these. When a piece of equipment, once given up on, came back stronger, not by luck, but by hands that had survived places where a 1-second delay meant death. Layla didn't need a resume. She had her fingerprints, and the metal recognized them before the people did. Because some skills don't need to be spoken, only proven by the one thing that never lies, performance. Benji Morales never believed in luck. On the battlefield, everything had to be proven with blood, sweat, and irreversible decisions. He was the kind of man who didn't put his finger on the trigger unless he was certain the gun would fire when it needed to. No one survived 3 deployments in Syria and 2 in Fallujah, still standing, by trusting the wrong person. So when he heard about a civilian contractor fixing guns in the West Armory, he didn't care. He'd heard those stories too many times. Some new face sent down as part of a trial program. Someone from DARPA with a vague resume. People like that usually left before the dust could settle on their boots. But then, something made him pause. His old Scar-L, the gun his own technical team had labeled hopeless, was resting neatly in her hands. She, the slender woman with dark hair and expressionless eyes, was taking the gun apart with an eerie calm, not a single wasted motion, not a flicker of hesitation. Her hands moved as if this wasn't her first time, but her thousandth. No references, no notes. She was fixing it, but it felt more like she was recalling something she'd done before rather than figuring out something new. Benji stopped, crossed his arms, and watched quietly from a distance. He wasn't used to watching someone else handle his weapon, but this time he couldn't look away. There was something in the way she worked. The angle of her wrist, the rhythm of her lever presses, the way she inserted the gauge into the chamber. That made him stay silent. She used a rare gas adjustment tool, one he'd only seen in the SEAL kit he carried in Eastern Europe. Something even military engineers knew only from blueprints. She didn't speak, but every movement told a story, not in words but in experience, and no one could fake that. When the SCAR-L clicked back together perfectly, the sound of the bolt locking was like a verdict that needed no announcement. She wiped her hands, arranged her tools precisely, and turned away, as if what she'd just done was just another item on a checklist. Benji watched, his chest heavy, not with doubt but with something challenged within him. A vague but undeniable feeling. For the first time in years, he sensed someone else understood the things he'd had to learn. The things only survivors know, paid for with a price only they could comprehend. He unslung his SR-25 from his shoulder. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a memory, a companion through countless night raids, through ambushes where a single misstep could get an entire team wiped out. He'd never let anyone touch it, not a soul. But this time, he walked to her bench, placed it down as gently as one would lay down a promise, and stepped back. The entire armory froze for a moment, not because of her, because of him. A seasoned SEAL who never trusted anyone outside his unit had just handed his personal weapon to a woman with no uniform, no insignia, no introduction, and stepped back. No explanation, no warnings, no defending his reputation, just a simple act of trust. A trust that could mean life itself, and a statement that needed no words. I trust you more than I doubt you. Because in war, it's not the person with authority who earns trust. It's the one who's been there in the place where no one survives unless they know exactly what they're holding in their hands. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then keep listening to the story. There are still surprises ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story so we know you're still with us. Sergeant Colin Weller wasn't easily impressed. After more than 20 years managing the armory for the Army Special Forces, he'd seen every type of profile, every kind of person, from technicians fresh out of the academy to retired veterans transitioning to new roles. All had passed through his hands, quietly but thoroughly vetted. To Weller, every file was a map. The more complex the person, the thicker the file, and the cleaner, smoother the record, the more suspicious it was. Layla Brennan's file was one of the thinnest he'd ever seen. No detailed resume, no list of assignments, no performance evaluations. Just a single line typed in an outdated font at the bottom of the page. Formerly served in Project Nightwalker, Batch B3 decommissioned. Weller stopped breathing at the third word. Nightwalker wasn't an ordinary program. It didn't appear in mission numbering systems, internal bulletins, or even in classified interdepartmental intelligence briefings. It was a name that existed only in hushed conversations, at midnight, between two old-timers who'd survived. A special project, its full details unknown to anyone, only that those who entered it rarely came back. Batch B3 didn't reveal much, but to those who'd been around long enough, the designation pointed to tactical technical teams tied to covert insertion units, where operatives weren't allowed names and their weapons weren't allowed to fail. Weller leaned back in his chair, clutching the file as if it might detonate if he loosened his grip for a second. In the quiet of his office, there was only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the pounding of his heart in his chest. All this time, he'd seen Layla as a shadow in the workshop, working neatly, meticulously, efficiently. But he'd never imagined she'd walk the line of missions even the military steered clear of. because only those who'd seen blood congeal on a gun barrel, who'd disassembled weapons with bare hands in the midst of chaos, were assigned to Nightwalker. In that place, a loose screw wasn't a technical error. It was a death sentence. And every gun, every scope, every round was treated like the last promise of survival. She had lived through that, and now she was quietly sitting at a repair station in the armory of Fort Jackson, cleaning guns labeled beyond repair. Weller took a deep breath and placed the file back in the locked drawer. There was nothing more to read, but nothing more was needed. In a world where people demanded verification, checks, and approvals, there were some records where a single line was enough. From that moment, he began to see Layla differently, not with the eyes of a superior looking at a civilian employee, but with the gaze of someone who'd lost friends in the field, and realized the woman sitting in the corner had stood in that same place perhaps more times than he'd ever know. No need for stories, no need for proof, just the knowledge that the guns she was fixing might have once been stained with the blood of people neither of them had met. But both owed one thing: to come back. Because some files aren't meant to be read, but to remind you that there are people who've done things no one dares speak of, and still survived to keep doing their work in silence. 2 weeks had passed since that afternoon when Benji Morales placed his SR-25 on Layla's bench without a word. Since then, he hadn't returned to the repair station. Not out of fear, but because of a strange, nameless feeling inside him. Like when you hand the keys to your home to a stranger, not because you believe they'll do well, but because your instinct tells you they've protected more homes than you'll ever know. On Friday morning he returned. The armory was the same, smelling of machine oil mixed with old wood, the clink of metal, the faint laughter behind glass. But the workbench in the corner was no longer as it had been. Layla wasn't there. Instead, something made him stop mid-step. His SR-25, the gun he'd carried back from Fallujah, held tight under a hail of bullets, fired just once in silence to save his team, was lying neatly on the bench. No traces of dust, sweat, or sand remained. Every engraving had been clean, the rough casing now gleaming smooth like metal reborn. But what took his breath away wasn't the gun. It was what lay in front of it, a wooden frame, not too large, not ostentatious, made of aged oak with horizontal grains, each fiber still bearing the marks of a craftsman's touch. On the frame, there was no gold plaque, no signature, no emblem of any military unit, just a small brass plate etched subtly. Trust sometimes needs no reason. No one claimed credit, no one demanded recognition, not a single line of explanation. But Benji understood this wasn't gratitude. This was a response to a seemingly simple act. He had stepped back. He let her work without interference, not because he knew who she was, but because he sensed who she had been. And now that was placed on the bench as proof, not for him, but for everyone who'd ever walked in here with doubt in their hearts. A wooden frame, a gun, a single phrase. 3 things enough to change how people saw a nameless figure in the system. Benji stepped closer, leaned down, and lightly touched the gun's body. It was still the same piece of metal, but now it carried not just his survival, but an affirmation for someone once deemed untrustworthy. No one in the armory spoke, but everyone had seen the frame. Some didn't understand its meaning. Some nodded quietly. And the rest, those who'd watched Layla, noticed how she never made a mistake. They knew. What lay on the bench wasn't the gun. It was a message that sometimes the right thing isn't waiting for verification, but choosing to trust in those who don't need to prove anything. When Layla returned, she didn't look at Benji. She didn't ask about the gun. She just set down her tool tray, put on her gloves, and continued her work, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed, not in her, but in those around her. From then on, people started bringing more complex equipment to her bench, not because she asked for it, but because they'd realized some things should only be entrusted to someone who doesn't need promises, just results. And if a gun could be revived in the hands of a person without a title, then perhaps the thing worth preserving most was trust without reason. Layla remained at her old corner bench next to spare parts rack number 3, where the light from a narrow window often streamed in at midday. No nameplate, no sign, no badge of rank. She arrived on time, left later than everyone else, as if her existence was merely a part of the armory's rhythm, not its focal point. She never introduced herself, never spoke of her past, never shared what she'd been through, nor did she speak up when others debated techniques they'd never tried. She simply kept working, day after day, week after week, with the precision and patience of someone who'd chosen silence as their language of survival. A young recruit, still adjusting to the rhythm of the training ground, had his ACOG sight adjusted by her when no one was watching. No words of instruction, just a nod, a gentle hand movement, and a light touch on a misalignment so subtle it was nearly invisible to the naked eye. The gun afterwards shot grouping so tight that the young soldier could only look at her with a mix of gratitude and bewilderment. More than once, mid-level commanders began bringing their personal weapons to her bench. They didn't request or order. They just placed them down. A P226, an M110, sometimes high-end optics fresh from the battlefield. No explanations given, none needed. They didn't ask if she was qualified to maintain them. They'd known the answer for a long time, not in her file, but in the consistency of her results. The guns that passed through her hands returned in a state people described as better than new. Not just clean, but understood, in a way only those who'd relied on a machine for survival could feel. Engineers from higher units once proposed interviewing her. They wanted to write a special report on the most effective civilian personnel at Fort Jackson's armory. She declined, politely, gently, without offending anyone, but absolutely firm. Instead, she left only one message, attached to the personal file that had been forgotten in an old metal cabinet. A single line typed on an old typewriter, not bolded, unsigned. "I've done what was necessary. Now let me help those who are doing." No one responded to that note, but it remained in her file like a reminder for anyone who happened to open it, that some contributions don't need recognition, that not everyone who excels needs to appear in a report. Layla still wore her faded gray shirt, her worn-out shoes, and a glove with a torn finger. She didn't switch to new attire, didn't ask for more equipment, didn't demand anything except a space quiet enough to keep fixing the guns others had given up on. But the atmosphere in the armory had changed. No more skeptical glances, no more unkind jokes. Everyone who passed by nodded, not as a greeting, but as acknowledgement. And in that silent acknowledgement, there was something no document could record. Trust built by hands alone, through every wipe, assembly, adjustment, through lifeless metal that had brought back life. She still didn't speak much, but people had learned to listen to her, not with their ears, but with their eyes. And when a discarded gun was restored, no one asked, "Who did it?" anymore. They already knew the answer. Because the outcome of silence isn't applause, but a space where no one needs to prove themselves anymore, only to continue. There are people like Layla, unassuming, without prestigious badges, not needing others' recognition to do their work right. They are the silent pieces in a larger machine, yet they carry values that can't be measured by rank or medals. Her story reminds us that sometimes the greatest recognition comes not from praise, but from changed gazes and trust quietly placed in the right hands. If you've ever been overlooked, quietly worked without notice, remember, your efforts still have value, and one day your silence will become the loudest voice in the room. Thank you for following this story with us. If Layla's story moved you or reminded you of someone you have known, please leave a comment below. We want to hear about the memories, the quiet people you have met. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to keep spreading stories that bring hope and healing.